Justice Minister Ronald Lamola says while the parole system may be flawed, it isn't broken. He's held a meeting with the Western Cape Parole Board and Correctional Services officials to address flaws in the system. Lamola says if an offender is released on parole, that individual shouldn't be a risk to society. The minister's comments come after a young boy was killed this weekend, allegedly at the hands of a parolee. It's the fourth time that such a parolee has been implicated in a murder in the Western Cape in recent months. The minister joins me live now from Cape Town. Minister, good evening. Thank you for your time tonight. Firstly, what are some of the flaws that you've been able to identify in the system, these irregularities that you speak of? What are they?
Evening to the viewers at home. Indeed, there are a number of flaws in our system. One of them is that the information that comes to the parole board, it's contained in what is called SAPS 62 and SAPS 69, which only describe the offense. For example, it will say the person is convicted of murder, but it just describes how it happened, but it does not contain some of the important information, for example, of the victims, of the community circumstances, including the circumstances and the issues that relates to the offender himself, which sometimes makes it difficult for the parole board to, when it deals with the matter, to look at a comprehensive picture. So in today's meeting, we have agreed that now there needs to be a very close collaboration between correctional services and the SAPS, because you will understand that the SAPS has the police docket. It has the comprehensive information. So that information will have to be taken from that context. The second flaw which we have also identified is the fact that in certain circumstances there will be lapse of judgment where the parolees or an inmate will be given parole without some kind of victim-offender consultation, where the victim becomes surprised that now the offender has been released without him or her being notified to exercise his right to comment on whether the person should be eligible for parole or not. And in such kind of situations, even when the victim has been consulted, in certain circumstances, you'll find that the victim has been consulted. But the community where the parolee is taken into becomes shocked. They don't know what are the parole conditions, where can this parolee do and go to. So there's those number of issues that we have realized and seen from within the system. But there are also some of the systematic challenges that may need some kind of legislative review. For example, on some of the crimes that the President has already given us an instruction to deal with, that relates to GBV, sexual offenses, which we are looking into. How do we ensure that if a person indeed has been found guilty, for example, of some kind of a sexual offense, is given a harsh sentence, and also there is a clear description that this person cannot get some kind of a parole in a specific given time. So at this stage, for example, you will see some of the matters. You'll find that is a person who was found guilty of a murder of a child, who was given a 9 to 10 years sentence, and then that means his dates of release becomes earlier. So there are those number of issues that we have observed, including the issue of rehabilitation programs of the offenders in terms of the risk plan. It must be in line with the offender's kind of mental or kind of offense that he has committed. For example, as we speak now, when we deal with an offender, we deal with them on the basis that, for example, offenders have committed murder, they are grouped together to attend a case that relates to murder. But you might find in the circumstances, there are peculiar circumstances that relates to one offender, who might not be responsive to the general program that will give to each and everyone who is convicted of murder. Because in certain circumstances, you might find that the offender is convicted of murder, but in real situation, when you do analysis and all the information, you might end up concluding that this offender in reality was an assassin or a hitman, was not just committing a murder. So those are all the information and data that we believe that when there is close collaboration between correctional service, the SAPS, and all the data of information that can be accessed, we could be able to close the gaps.
All right, Minister, I'm going to ask you to hang 10 for us. We'll continue our conversation in a moment. We're going to take a look at some of the headlines that are making news tonight. A final look at your headlines for this evening. If you're live on News at Prime, we continue our conversation with Justice Minister Ronald Lamola. It's on the review then that they'll be implementing to some of the processes of the parole board, in particular in the Western Cape. Minister, one of the things that has been raised, of course, has been high-risk offenders and the extent to which the department actually has data on where some of these offenders might be once they're released on parole, and whether the tracking mechanisms of these offenders are in place.
Yes, indeed, there are tracking mechanisms in place. For example, with the Panga matter of Tasni, one of the challenges which emerged is that you will know that he had absconded. So when he has absconded, the Department of Correctional Services opened a case with the SAPS, and there was a prolonged period of them not finding him. When it's a high risk, the risk of him reoffending becomes very high. So that collaboration between the two departments remains very important. There are various mechanisms that are being used to track and to monitor the offenders, including having the parole officers who are responsible for that person. You will also remember that there was a process of electronic monitoring, which was dodged by a scandal, and as a result, the SIU applied for the tender to be set aside. So we are also looking at the various options in regard to technology. How can we be able to merge and use the data that is available between ourselves, the SAPS, Home Affairs, including community members, to ensure that there is no these lapses that are continuously happening. We are also studying the current situation in the Western Cape, because it does seem to us that the high level of this offending or of deviating from the parole conditions is happening here mostly in the Western Cape. What are the unique and the peculiar situation? It does happen in many other parts of the country, but it has become very endemic in the Western Cape, which has become a very grave concern for us. Hence, we have also commissioned some kind of study so that we are also not bringing a generic solution to a unique kind of situation, because the Western Cape also has its own peculiarities.
So then, as it stands, are you saying that this particular issue then, perhaps even some of the findings and the recommendations that you're going to be implementing, are those limited to the Western Cape, or do they apply to the rest of the country?
They will apply to the rest of the country. As we speak, what is the engagement now? We're going to start here in the Western Cape, is where we're going to start with regards to the findings. For example, with regard to the issues of the comprehensive information and the use of data, it is starting immediately because the SAPS participated in the engagement. But I also had a meeting immediately after that with the Minister of Police and the National Commissioner, which we also agreed that we need to extend it countrywide, so that this system is a system that responds comprehensively across the country in terms of the data that we need to use to enable the parole boards and also the correctional services. When it does take a decision, it has got all the relevant information at its disposal.
Of course, it also immediately turns attention then to the correctional services and our ability to rehabilitate offenders to the point where they can be safely reintegrated into society, and reducing the level then of recidivism that we're seeing.
Yes, indeed. It has to be extended to that. Hence, we are speaking about looking at the programs of rehabilitation that we currently have in the department. As I was saying, the programs as we speak now are geared towards dealing with a group of people. For example, saying you are convicted of murder or rape and so forth. You are all given the same kind of a program. But it does look like we might need to also have a program that responds to some of the specific risk assessment of the offenders, because when you deal with a group, you might miss some of the systematic issues that relates to one offender, who you might not be really aware of some of the aspects that you might need to work on for that person to be said to be completely rehabilitated. And the program, obviously, of the parole system, it's very important, integral part of our rehabilitation program and reintegration into society, because it is a first step of a person who was inside the correctional facility or a prison. For him at least to get out for an hour or for a day, for a week or for some time, so that there is a gradual reintegration in society. Because if you will just want to integrate a person, it might shock society and the system when you just release him without some kind of gradual reintegration. And that is what the parole system is being used for. And for example, across the country, as I was speaking, we are not only dealing with the Western Cape. Across the country, we've got more than 45,000 parolees across the country whom we are currently reintroducing into society. And most of them have been compliant, but there will be those few who then commit these heinous crimes that are shocking the nation. And we are also saying one is just too many, because if a person, even if it's one or two or four, it affects the whole and tarnish the image of the entire system. Hence, we want an immediate and quick response to close all the flaws and the loopholes, so that the system is responsive, but also society can also play its role to help us in terms of administration of the system.
Mr. Lamola, briefly before I let you go, if you can perhaps tell us, are there any investigations then that are going to be run, in particular into individuals that are serving on these parole boards who you think must be held liable for some of the releases that we've had in recent months that have led to these deaths?
I could not get the full question, but I want to believe it might be saying, are there going to be some kind of investigation to hold officials accountable with regard to the release? I could not get it, but I think that is what it said. Indeed, this process also includes to look at what were the flaws, what happened, who was involved. And you will know there was a case of Hewitt in Port Elizabeth, which we have reviewed. There was a review process. The matter has been set aside. There is also the current case, as you might be aware, of the coffin case in Mohlahlana. It is also currently under review because the offender was released without consulting or consultation with the victims, and the victims are shocked. They only see it in the media, while our policies are clear that there must be consultation with the victims. So those are kind of cases where you will have to look into who was involved, what happened, what was such a decision taken, when the policies are very clear. And that is what we are aiming to do also here in the Western Cape, to look into the comprehensive. If there was any circumvention, we have been very clear to the National Commissioner and the officials in the department that such circumventions must be dealt with harshly, and there must be no mercy, because the administration, the integrity, and the whole system is very important for the criminal justice administration in the whole country and for the safety of our communities.
All right, let's leave it there for tonight. Justice and Correctional Services Minister Ronald Lamola.